Hi guys, and welcome back to the Mighty Blues. My name is of course Cameron. Thought we'd do a little bit of a video today in the sun. Why not? It is about 27 degrees or something like that in the northwest, so I thought we'd do a little bit of a sit down video in the sun and just talk a little bit about the Demarai Gray situation. Obviously this has been an ongoing situation for quite some time now. We haven't seen Demarai Gray at all this season, had no involvement of any of the previous 3 or 4 Premier League games, no involvement in the Cup game, no involvement in pre-season, of course, after he came back from international duty. And the general sort of feeling and consensus around the situation was that he wanted to leave the football club. The football club and the manager were happy for him to leave, and it was just a matter of time before that solution was resolved. He found a new club, we allowed him to move on. I suppose the plan or the idea was that we'd be sat here, now a few days after the transfer window had closed, and Demarai Gray would have been, have left the football club, signed for somebody else, and we wouldn't really be having this conversation. That's not quite how it has gone and not quite how it has played out in typical Everton fashion. And with Everton being, I've said this a couple of times and I will say it again, Everton very much reminding me of a soap opera. Nothing ever quite happens how you expect it to happen. This situation has become more and more complicated. Obviously Demarai Gray has remained at the football club beyond the transfer deadline day. There is still a chance he could leave the club, obviously with the Saudi Arabian deadline being a little bit later. I believe their transfer window is still currently open, so he could actually still leave the football club over the next week or so. But we're just in a really, really sticky situation again, and it reminds me quite a lot of the Luca Dean, Rafa Benitez situation a couple of years ago, when obviously Rafa Benitez come into the football club. Luca Dean at the time was one of our top performers. Okay, he'd come off the back of a slightly poor season in terms of defensively, but he was still somebody that a lot of the fans loved, a lot of the fans got behind, still somebody that going forward and creatively was a massive part of this side. And all of a sudden he come in, he had a falling out with the manager. There was different sides of the story. Some people believed that Rafa Benitez was in the right and Luca Dean wasn't willing to train and wasn't willing to work hard and had spat his dummy a little bit. Some people believed that Luca Dean was right and the manager had just completely frozen him out and he wanted to play for Everton and the manager wasn't having none of it. There was a big back and forth, and you didn't really know who to believe until it come out later on, obviously years down the line. The full story sort of come out a little bit more, and we actually got a gauge of what the situation was. We're in a very similar position at the moment with Demarai Gray and Sean Dyche, and I feel like once again, similar to the Luca Dean, Rafa Benitez situation, we probably won't get a full explanation to this until years down the line when it's been resolved, and as I said, it's all sorted by then. So we're obviously in a position where at the moment the player has released a statement on Instagram stating that, how much he appreciates Evertonians and he appreciates the support from Evertonians. However, he finds it difficult to play for somebody that doesn't respect him. I think the exact statement was something along the lines of, Evertonians have always been great to me, but it's really difficult to play for somebody that doesn't respect you as a human or as a man or something like that. We're in a position with the manager where he hasn't said much about Demarai Gray. I think he was asked about him once in a press conference earlier on in the season, and he said that he wasn't fit, which again I don't believe to be the case. I think he was fit. It was just a case of this ongoing situation with him not wanting to be at the football club or the club not wanting him at the football club. Whatever it is, as I said, it's incredibly confusing, and it once again puts us in a position where we are sort of, like I said, we're in this period now where we sort of need Demarai Gray. Obviously we failed to bring anybody in on deadline day, and I know we've got Jack Harrison to come back, and I know we've got Dwight McNeil to come back, and once those two players are fully fit and available, then maybe Demarai Gray isn't quite as needed. But at this current moment, as things stand, with Dwight McNeil still not 100% fit, with Jack Harrison still not being anywhere near a matchday squad, and with Alex Iwobi, of course, leaving the football club to join Fulham on deadline day, we're in a position where we could do with Demarai Gray's services, and ultimately, look, I've been very vocal in my opinion of Demarai Gray over the years. I don't think he's a particularly great footballer. I don't think he's a particularly consistent footballer, and I don't think he's somebody that we should be, on our knees begging to stay at the football club. But the reality is he has proven to score goals in the Premier League before, and whilst it might only be 3 or 4 goals, we've seen already this season, in the opening 4 games of the season, how desperate we are for goal scorers. We scored 2 against Sheffield United on Saturday afternoon, and that was brilliant, but before then we hadn't managed to score a single goal in what was 30 odd, 40 odd shots in the Premier League. So even though Demarai Gray's 3 or 4 goals a season mightn't seem particularly great, and it mightn't seem like a figure that you look at and you go, oh my god, we desperately need that, those goals sort of, they top up at the end of the season, and ultimately those 4 goals could be massively important come, April, May time, when we may or may not be, in another relegation battle. So really, we could have done with keeping Demarai Gray, and I suppose the perfect scenario and situation and outcome to this would have been, Demarai Gray would have maybe wanted to move away from Everton Football Club. Maybe Everton had been happy to grant that. It didn't happen. Ultimately, for whatever reason, a bid wasn't accepted or personal terms couldn't be agreed. It didn't happen. Demarai stays at the football club, gets his head down, works hard, the manager's happy with that, the player's happy with that, and he goes again until January, and maybe he gets his move in January. Maybe the club say to him, look, if you get your head down, if you work hard, if you play for us, we'll do everything we can to try and get you a move in January, but first, can you get us a few goals, can you win us a few games in the Premier League leading up to that, so we can, so we can have something to show for. It doesn't look like we're in that position though, does it? Again, we're in a position where a situation has very clearly only had one outcome. There was only ever one outcome to this situation, and it was Demarai Gray leaving Everton Football Club. No other outcome would have made any sense. No other outcome would have benefited every party. 4 or 5 weeks ago, when this decision was clearly made, or whenever it was that this decision was made, the best outcome for all parties was for Demarai Gray to leave Everton Football Club. The best outcome for Everton was that way, because whatever, either the manager doesn't fancy him, doesn't think he's good enough, doesn't think he works hard in training, doesn't think his attitude's good enough, or because the player doesn't want to be here, and therefore if a player doesn't want to be here, the best solution obviously is to move him on and replace him with somebody that does want to be here. The only solution to this situation was ever that Demarai Gray moves on, and because of Everton's inability to go and bring in somebody in the transfer window, there was a rumour a couple of weeks ago that Demarai Gray's move was on hold because Everton were unwilling to sell until they found a replacement. But they weren't unwilling to sell because they didn't want Demarai Gray to leave. It was just always about, we need to find somebody to come in and replace you first, which is sensible. But it isn't sensible when you get to 11 o'clock on deadline day and you haven't found that replacement, and then all of a sudden you're in this situation where you've got a player that doesn't want to be here, and his side of the story has been publicly put out there, in which he doesn't believe he is being respected by the manager. A club that probably don't want him here, otherwise he probably, he wouldn't feel like that, and maybe the manager has been slightly disrespectful to him. We don't know. Again, we're in this situation where you don't know who to believe. I've seen a couple of people saying, well, but Demarai Gray's done this before, and his attitude on the pitch seems to suggest that maybe he does think a bit above his station. But we've also been in positions before where managers have completely frozen players out for no reason, or they've looked at them a couple of times insane and thought, no, you're not my type of player, you're not involved. We don't know what the truth is, and we won't know the truth until this situation is concluded, and we're years down the line probably. But what we do know is Everton are now in a position where it looks a little bit silly, doesn't it? Because the club now, according to reports in the media, various different sources across the internet that, obviously have found information out about this situation, are now reporting that Everton are unwilling to allow Demarai Gray to leave because of the fact they weren't able to strengthen in the transfer window. Reports that El Ettifaq in Saudi Arabia, obviously the team managed by Steven Gerrard, they're heavily interested in bringing him to the football club, but Everton are blocking that move because Everton will be unable to find a replacement because the transfer window is closed. Demarai Gray wants the move, he's agreed the move, and maybe this Instagram post he put up about respect and not wanting to it being difficult to play for somebody that doesn't respect you, maybe that's a tactic to try and force a move. Maybe that's a tactic to try and make fans think, well, you know what, you don't want to be here anyway, so let him leave. But Everton have put themselves in a situation, and I can't help but feel like the board and the director of football have put the manager in a situation where their hands are tied behind the back a little bit. Because if they allow Demarai Gray to leave, then they're allowing another player to leave out of this squad that we cannot replace until at least January. Now, as I said, Demarai Gray for me wasn't isn't an unbelievable footballer and isn't somebody that Everton should be on their knees begging to keep at the football club. But given the circumstance that we can't replace him, it's impossible to replace him unless we go and find a free agent that's 30, 34 years old, something like that, that's going to come in and make that impact, which is very unlikely. Everton at the moment could do with Demarai Gray, could do with his goals, and again, whilst he's inconsistent, whilst he's not the greatest footballer in the world, we know he's capable of winning a game of football. We know he's capable of pulling a worldie out the bag. Now, that might only be once in 10 games, and you might say that's not good enough, that's not consistent enough, but it's either 1 in 10 games or none in 10 games if he leaves, because we can't bring somebody in to replace him. So this once again is a really, really sticky situation for the football club to be in, and one that it just feels like it constantly happens with Everton, where we put ourselves in these positions that you're sort of thinking, how have you managed to put yourself in that position? How have you managed to find a situation where the solution was so clear and so obvious, but we haven't come to the solution, and now we're in a position where we're thinking, what do we do here now? Because we look a little bit silly if we keep him. He wants to move. He's publicly coming out and saying he wants to move. We look a little bit silly if we now say, no, you're not going anywhere, we want to keep you. But we also look a little bit silly if we sell him, because we've not got nobody to come in and replace him. Our options are then much, much weaker. Look at our wide players, for example. You've got Dan Juma, you've got Jack Harrison, and you've got Dwight McNeil. Realistically, you've got Lewis Dobbin in there. Now, I personally don't think Lewis Dobbin is ready. Some people would argue that. But in terms of Premier League, experienced Premier League goal scorers, you've got 3 players there to cover 2 positions every week. One of them gets injured. You've got 2 players there that have to play every single week. One of them is Jack Harrison, who's just come off the back of an injury. Another one is Dwight McNeil, who's just come off the back of quite a serious injury. The depth in options is ridiculously weak once again. And, again, I'm going to do a video in the next coming days about the transfer window as a whole, and about deadline day, and about how I think the transfer window went, because we do it every year. We always do a sit down, review the transfer window type of video. But I just can't fathom how Everton Football Club have known that this situation has been happening with Demarai Gray, on top of knowing that we already need reinforcements anyway. So not only have the club known that we've needed a winger anyway, because we need that, even if Demarai Gray was absolutely made up at Everton and wanted to stay forever, we'd still need a winger. They've known we've needed a winger. They've also known that, well, hang on, we've got a player here who we've pretty much told he can go, he wants to go, and we're only waiting to sign someone for him to go. And if we don't bring somebody in, then not only are we weaker, but he's then got to stay against, when he doesn't want to, and it's probably going to cause issues there. And yet, we still haven't managed to go and bring somebody in the last week of the transfer window. As I said the other day, forget deadline day as a whole. Oh, it's deadline day, this is great. Deadline day isn't the problem. The problem is we didn't bring this player in, and by this player I mean the winger, the replacement to Demarai Gray. We didn't bring him in 4, 5, 6 weeks ago when we knew Demarai Gray wanted to leave the football club, or we knew there was a situation that Demarai Gray was going to leave the football club, because we knew that when Everton played Stoke away in their penultimate pre-season friendly, which was what now, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. We knew that Demarai Gray probably wasn't going to stay at Everton Football Club, because he wasn't in the pre-season games. He was rumoured to be wanting out, etc, etc. So forget we didn't sign anybody in that 12 hours of deadline day, or whatever it was. The fact we didn't sign anybody in the 7 weeks prior, when we knew we needed a winger, and then we knew we had a winger at the football club that wanted out and we needed to replace, it's baffling. And it's once again put us in this situation where we look a little bit stupid, because we've either got to keep a player that doesn't want to be here and we've told can go, or we've got to allow him to move on and further weaken our options in that area. Like I said, you probably will hear the typical, well, we tried our best and we had this deal going and we had that deal going and we had this, that and this and the other. It's all a load of bollocks. It's all a lot. You hear it every single year from those at Everton Football Club. We worked hard, we tried our best, we done everything we could. Nottingham Forest signed 7 players on deadline day. 7 players. God knows how many players they signed across this whole summer. They signed 20 odd players last summer. I think they've signed something like 40 odd players in 2 years. 7 players they signed on one day. And you're telling me that there's not options out there. Callum Hudson-Odoi has signed for Nottingham Forest. Either been a great player for Everton for me, either been a great player for Everton. Various players have moved clubs in the last week of the transfer window that Everton could have looked at and maybe could have gone and got. and we didn't. So the whole, well, we did, we tried and this, that and the other, and the whole Everton don't want to sign players for the sake of it. But we wouldn't be signing players for the sake of it, would we? The sake of it is to replace Demarai Gray. So that, it's not, the way it was put, we spoke about it in a video the other day on Deadline Day. The way it was put, it was like, well, Everton aren't just going to bring in players for the sake of bringing in players. But that would suggest that there's no reason to bring in the player. But there is a reason to bring in the player, because you've got a player there that wants to leave, that you've told can leave. If you were to believe the reports, as I said, allegedly, Everton mightn't have told Demarai Gray he could leave, but the way it looks very much like Everton have said at one point, right, you can go. And Demarai Gray has said, right, I want to go. So there's your reason. It's not for no reason, is it? Everton don't want to bring in a winger just for the sake. You're not. You're bringing in a winger to replace the one that wants to leave. And that probably still is going to leave, because that is still the only solution. Whether we've signed the replacement or not, the only real solution is that Demarai Gray will leave the football club because he doesn't want to be here. He's publicly come out on social media and said, it's difficult to play for somebody that doesn't respect me. Now, okay, it's not beyond the realms of possibility for him to get his head down, for Dice to maybe go and have a conversation with him, and then for him to play for Everton until January. That isn't beyond the realms of possibility. But let's be honest, the likelihood is that Everton will take the money from Saudi in the next few days, because Demarai Gray is probably knocking on that door every single day saying, I still want to leave, by the way, I still don't want to be here. It's not my fault that you haven't replaced me. It's not my fault that you haven't signed somebody. I still don't want to be here. I still want my move. So again, another situation that Everton have found themselves in that was completely unavoidable, with a bit of planning and with a bit of good practice and people that knew what they, and having people at the club that know what they're doing. This situation would have been completely avoided, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But it hasn't, because once again, we're in a position where we're scratching our asses and we look a little bit silly. And whichever way this concludes, we're going to look a little bit silly. And as I said, there's no excuse. Well, we tried our hardest, we couldn't sign players, this, that and the other. Teams in the relegation zone, teams that are struggling at the moment, sign players. As I said, Nottingham Forest signed 7 on deadline day. We had loans available. We had deals that we could have done that meant that finances wouldn't have had to have been put down instantly available. We were all made up on a week ago. Last Tuesday, when Beto was announced and it was put out there by the Athletic that Everton wouldn't have to make an initial payment until next year. And that was a player coming in from Udinese, owned by an owner that is notoriously difficult to negotiate with. And Everton deserve credit for that deal, because they are notoriously difficult owners, and they said about a week before, we're not selling Beto because it's too late in the transfer window and we can't find a replacement. Everton managed to bring him in a deal that financially works with the football club. You're telling me that that's the only deal in the history of football, the only player in the world currently that you could have made a deal like that for? I'm not having it. I'm sick of the excuses. I'm sick of the reasons. I'm sick of the bollocks. We've known this Demarai Gray situation has been going on for weeks, and still we haven't found a solution to it. And now we're in a position where it just looks a little bit silly. And once again, it's more noise on top of the pressure that the team is going through, because we're in bad form, on top of the pressure the manager's going through, on top of the pressure of the owners, the potential takeover falling through, the potential new owners being protested against that in other football clubs. It's all just, it adds and it adds and it adds and it adds and it adds. And with Everton, it's always situations that are avoidable. This was a completely avoidable situation. And yet, we chased and chased and chased and chased Wilfred Gnonto for 6, 7, 8 weeks, despite the fact that in the third week, we probably knew we weren't going to get him. Instead of moving on to other options, we chased, and now we're here. A player coming out publicly saying, basically, I don't want to be here. The club coming out, a week ago, or reports coming out a week ago that the club were happy to let him leave if they found a replacement. Now they don't want him to leave. Yeah. Listen, let us know your thoughts in the comments. I think this one, again, has been handled ridiculously poorly by, whether it be the manager, whether it be the player, but generally the football club. We can sit here and have our feelings towards the actual situation. Who's at fault? Is it Gray? Is it Dice? Is it Gray? Is it Dice? We won't know that. Some people will side with Dice, some people will side with Gray. We won't know that probably until years down the line when it concludes. What we need to focus ourselves on is the biggest problem is the fact that situation was ongoing, and the club couldn't resolve it. For 6, 7 weeks, the club couldn't bring in a replacement for him. Or they couldn't line a replacement up to be able to say, right, when we get that money, you're going to come in. Because that hasn't happened, has it? Because if that had have happened, we'd have sold Demarai Gray. And then if the club had come out and gone, well, what we did is we had a replacement for him, we sold him, and then we tried to buy that replacement, and that football club changed their mind, then we could go, well, that makes sense. But we haven't, because Demarai Gray's still an Everton player. I don't know. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. We'll be back with the game review to the Sheffield United game at some point. But yeah, like I said, another ridiculously complex situation that we didn't need to be in, that we find ourselves in through the absolute gross mismanagement of this football club. And this is another situation that has been handled ridiculously poorly by Everton, to add to the list of hundreds of situations that have been poorly handled by Everton over the years. But there you go. Big thanks for watching. Leave a like if you've enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you soon.